In the previous lesson, I introduced what's called the basic jazz blues progression, which you can think of as a more harmonically sophisticated cousin of the basic 1-4-5 blues progression that most guitar players know. Now I'd like to show you a couple of interesting variations that add some chord substitutions that guitar players, learned guitar players, will often substitute. And we'll use the key of G again, that same Freddie Green big band flat 4 style comping. And I'll show you another interesting variation, a more modern style where you play like a walking bass line and chord stabs. So you sound like a whole rhythm section, like a band in a box. So here's the jazz blues progression, the flat 4 comping style, extra chords added. So as we did last time, starting off with this G7 voicing, shell voicing, what jazz arrangers call shell voicing, which is just the root, the dominant 7th, and the 3rd. The A string is muted by the back of the middle finger here. And I'm sliding into it, doing this staccato articulations where you just kind of like relax your grip on the chord right after you strum it. So it's short and crisp. You know, see I'm just going squeeze, release, squeeze, release. I don't have to do any muting with the right hand, which is nice. And then I'm adding those little upstroke, I call hiccups, on some of the 8th note upbeats. That's just to help convey that swing feel. Dun, ka-dun, dun, dun, ka-dun, dun, 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 da, da. Because if you just did quarter notes, that itself doesn't necessarily convey a swing feel. But when you add those, chick-on, bum, 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 chick-on, dun, 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 chick-on, dun, chick-on, dun, chick-on. Those little upstrokes. And for those, I'm actually muting the strings. So I'm doing just what I did to silence the chords on the staccato strums. And I'm doing freehand muting. It's indicated by X's in tablature. You'll see that in figure 1 in this example. And now I'm doing that quick change to the 4 chord in bar 2. You know, as opposed to staying on the 1 chord for 4 bars. And then in bar 3, I'm doing D minor 7, G7, D flat 7 to C7. So this is an interesting chord substitution here in bars 3 and 4. I'm doing what's called a 2-5 to the 4 chord. The 4 chord is C, right? And then think of it as the 2 chord of C, D minor 7. It's D, F, C. The root, the minor 3rd, the minor 7, and then G7 is the 5 of C. So for a second here, we're just thinking as if we were in the key of C. So that's called the 2-5 to the 4 chord. And what was that? I went from the G bass note, G7, to D flat 7. Notice the interesting, it's an odd, peculiar sound, but it's kind of attractive to the ear because these 2 notes work over both bass notes. We have the G and D flat. Those are called a tritone apart. Tritone meaning 3 tones. So if you were to walk up, that's 1 whole step, that's 2 whole steps, that's 3 whole steps, 3 whole tones. And if you were to go down from the root, that's 1, 2, 3, you get to C sharp or D flat. The the devil in music, as they call it, flat 5. That's actually the midpoint between the octave. And what's really cool about that is that these active tones here, the 7th and the 3rd, which in and of themselves form a tritone. Okay, we have G7, F is the dominant 7th, B is the 3rd. Now when I switch that bass note, the 7th becomes the 3rd, and the 3rd becomes the 7th. They switch roles. Suddenly F is the 3rd of D flat, right? And then B is the 7th. And it creates a more interesting bass line. That kind of chromatic half-step down resolution. So now you know where that comes from, that from a half step above. That's like going 5, 1, but you're using a tritone sub, you're going flat 2, 1. Sorry, a little too much theory there, but getting back on track here in bar 5. And instead of playing the 4 chord for 2 bars, as is customary in a straight blues, we're going to go to what's called the sharp 4 diminished 7th, which has an unstable kind of tense sound that creates musical tension, dramatic musical tension that begs to be resolved. So we're going from the C chord, C7, and then that resolves back to the 1. Okay, now we're in bar 7. And now in the previous example, you recall I went G7, E7, and then I did 2-5, A minor 7 to D7. And then we did the 1, 6, 2-5 turnaround. Okay, so now from that same point, from when we go back to G in bar 7, we're going to go G7, C7. I'm taking that same voicing, just moving it up here. Instead of playing it here, I'm voicing it root 3rd, 7th, and now I'm voicing root 7th, 3rd. And then now B minor 7, which we finger the same way as A minor 7. We're making a little bar with the ring finger across the D and G strings at the 7th fret, and then fingering the root note B at the 7th fret with the middle finger, muting the A string, same way we would when doing a strummed octave. So we went G7, C7, 1, 4, 3, 6, 2, then you have the 2-5-1. So this C7 chord sets up the B minor 7 nicely, and this is what's called a substitution. And now in bar 9, instead of just doing A minor 7 to D7, I'm throwing in another chord here, and you go. And you could think of those as just half-step embellishments from above, like, you know. You can also look at them as tritone substitutions. A minor 7, E flat 7, that would actually be the tritone sub of A7. You could go A minor 7, A7 to D. So that becomes the 5 of 5, and then the 5 of 1. So A minor 7, E flat 7, D7, A flat 7. Again, tritone substitution. D7 is D, F sharp, C, right? Root 3rd, dominant 7. Switch the bass note down a tritone. 3 whole steps. Now the 3rd becomes the 7th. F sharp becomes G flat. It's the same note. F sharp, G flat. C, which was the 7th of D, now becomes the 3rd of A flat. It's just a more interesting resolution. And now for the turnaround in the last 2 bars, instead of going 1, 6, 2, 5, you know, it's very angular. You have these resolutions down a 5th or up a 4th. We're going to go chromatic. I'm using the tritone sub of E7, which is B flat 7. E7, B flat 7. You have these notes. Work. And then I could just do this. You've heard that before. That has its own logic because you're hearing that as a substitution of using tritone subs. So I'm kind of mixing it up here. I'm going G7, B flat 7, and then E flat 7 instead of A 7. Interchangeable. And then instead of D7, I'm using A flat 7. So I'm just going G, B flat, E flat, A flat. But I could have gone G, E, A, D, or I could have gone G, B flat, A, D. You know, any combination of those. You just move it back a fret and over a string. Okay, that was an example of a very traditional, like I said, a big band style, Freddie Green. You hear players like, Jim Hall, Joe Pass, Tal Farlow, Herb Ellis, Barney Kessel, all those old school guys, Bucky Pizzarelli, do that. And now I can show you an interesting variation. This has a walking bass line. Like, you picture do, 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 do on a bass, and then chord stabs, like what a piano player would do, bop, bop, bop. And it sounds like a little rhythm section. You got bass and drums going on. This is definitely a more modern take, something more contemporary players like Vic Joris or John Hart, Julian Lage would do when just soloing in a 2-guitar jam where you don't have a bass player to play the walking bass line. And I'm going to use hybrid picking instead of strumming. So I'm going to down pick the bass notes and I'm going to pluck the chord stabs. I'm also going to expand the chords a little bit, include notes on the second string. So I will be including the fifth of some of the chords and the ninth. So let me demonstrate it. I'll play 2 choruses again and throw in a little overdubbed second guitar playing a solo, and then I'll break it down for you. All right, so I'm down picking these bass notes. Let me just play the bass part by itself. Okay, that's called a walking bass line. It's constantly moving. What you're doing is hitting the root note of each chord whenever there's a chord change, and then you just fill out with scale tones, chromatic passing tones, arpeggio tones, whatever it takes to get to the next chord in a smooth way. You think of this as transition notes. And now what I'm doing is I'm using open string pull-offs to get those eighth note, to get the swing feel in here. Like, I'm going to exaggerate it here. Those are called ghost notes. They're really felt more than heard, so I'm not going out of my way to go, that would sound strange, but to go, you get those little boom, ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. Those are like the little hiccup things we were doing earlier when we were going. Okay, so, and the chord stabs, I'm plucking with my fingers. That's a G7 shape here, and I'm using my middle finger, ring finger, and pinky to pluck. Now I've added the fifth D on top. This is still like that shell voicing we used earlier. And I'm hitting it on the upbeat. It's almost like in a big band, we know, you hear like horn players, an arrangement that's going 2, 3, 4, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da, ba, two, bop, bop, ba, bop, ba, bop, horns or a piano, bop, ba, bop, that's called comping. And generally you want to keep it kind of sparse and let the groove breathe, let the bass and drums lay it down and leave room for the soloist, of course, right? So in bar 1, I'm going. Okay, so I went 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, 4. Okay, get the idea? And using that for hand muting, as soon as I pluck the chord, I'm just releasing my grip, loosening my grip slightly so that the notes stop ringing. G9, C9, G7. Now I'm doing the D minor 7 to G7 as we did earlier, but now I'm adding a note on the B string. That's the 9th. So now it's D minor 9. That's a color tone. And now I'm adding the sharp 5 to G7 here. And then D flat 9, sliding down to C9. So we get this interesting, what's called upper structure voice leading. Very smooth. And again, from bar 4, C9, back to G7, E7, sharp 9, the Hendrix chord, right? And then again, it's staccato, I get off of it. And then tritone sub. Yeah, that's just a half-step chromatic embellishment to A minor 7, B minor 7. And I'm kind of working it out so my fingers are taking turns here. A minor 7, that's the 2, right? We're coming into the 2-5 part of it in bar 9 here. Those little ghost notes. Here's the 5 chord, D7 sharp 9. So the voice setting here is G9. I'm using that shell voicing for G7 and then adding A on top. These are tension-filled voicings that sound kind of cool. And do that again, last 2 bars. It's got that strutting sound, right? Real cool. It's like a little big band in a box.